Welcome everybody out there in the Bosshole Transformation Nation. This is your host, John Broer, flying solo today because Sarah is on assignment. And I'm very excited to welcome a returning guest to the podcast, Dr. Todd Dewett. You may recall Dr. Dewett appeared on the program early in 2021, and he is back to promote his latest book. And he has a lot of great books. Check the show notes. But his latest book, Dancing with Monsters, we're going to talk about that today. And just as a reminder, Dr. Dewett is a best-selling leadership author, educator, and speaker. He started his career at Anderson Consulting and Ernst & Young, moved on to complete his PhD in organizational behavior at Texas A&M University. But now he speaks, writes, and has created an educational library of courses enjoyed by millions, specifically through LinkedIn Learning. But I'm telling you what, he's an energetic, amazing individual. You're going to love this interview and learning more about Dancing with Monsters. Let's get to it. The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, the talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Dr. Dewett, it is so good to have you back here on the Bosshole Chronicles. Welcome.
My pleasure. Kudos on continuing to make great episodes and having one of the best podcast names out there, period.
We appreciate that. We like it, and it does get a lot of attention. I know we've been doing this for 2.5 years, and frequently people say, "Oh, you're the Bosshole guy, right?" And it's like, yeah, I hope we're looking at that in the right context. But listen, I just want to remind our listeners, go into the show notes because we will actually post Dr. Dewett's original appearance on the Bosshole Chronicles from January 12th of 2021, A License to Lead. They all know, the audience knows, Todd, how, what great respect I have for the work that you've done over the years, the keynotes you have come in and have offered up for organizations that I've been associated with. But this is new. This is exciting because as an experienced published author, Show Your Ink, and all of Todd's books will be in the show notes. You just published a new book, and it's called Dancing with Monsters, and that's why you're here today. Just released a couple of weeks ago, and we're always excited to have new releases showcased on the podcast. So let's talk about Dancing with Monsters. It is a very different approach for you in terms of what you've written. So give us a little bit of the origin story and why this kind of a story.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking. I mean, first of all, I'm just a try junkie. I get bored doing the same thing more than maybe twice. And so I like to try new things. And I've long had my eye on this little part of the business book world, the fables area. And it's just in the back of my head for years. And this is the true story. I've tried to write a novel 3 separate times.
Okay. Okay.
You don't know this about me. I'm giving you new stuff here.
Yeah.
I tried to write a novel 3 times. I successfully finished all 3 times. And then all 3 times quickly determined that I am not a good novelist.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, the most recent time I did that, and I realized for the final time, I'm not that kind of writer. Continue doing what you love over there in the business world. So anyhow,
right.
There was a kernel of an idea in the latest one that didn't work that I didn't want to let go of. And it was about a vampire in an office situation. And I thought, okay, what else can I do with this thing? And then I remembered, I've long had this interest. Can I write in that area, the fable area? And I just got some ideas immediately. My head started going crazy. True story. I sat down and started writing. 6 hours later, first draft was done.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes it just comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. We just need that spark. Like you said, a kernel of an idea, and then it just goes.
I just want to play with mistakes and all those topics in a way that people could digest easily.
Well, and I think I think you've really hit on something but as we were talking about before I hit record, I think there's a growing number of these fables, stories, parables, and they're just so real. And rather than sort of your common, I don't want to say common, but a bit more academic book. And you're in the world of academics, but your books aren't really academic. They're very approachable, but this one is different. Before we talk about Joe the Vampire, you start this story out with a married couple. This married couple, Maria and Noah, and I don't want to spoil the book for anybody, but Noah's got a career decision to make. And they're having this conversation, and she brings up, hey, do you remember the story our professor told us where does Maria and Noah, where do they come from?
I was imagining myself in many coffee shop conversations. I was imagining many of my students I've had over the years,
Right.
thinking about some of the silly things and maybe useful things I've asked them to do in the course of our relationship, our teacher-student relationship. And it just seemed obvious and relatable and almost a universal place that so many professionals can relate to. Where do great conversations happen? There's only a few best answers to that.
Right.
And the coffee shop's one of them. So I wanted to put two people in a realistic situation that others could really go, oh, yeah, I get that. Or I hope to be in that situation soon. And how would I approach it? Let's see what they do.
Right. And Noah's circumstance is very real. I mean, as I read it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I know exactly what he's about to experience and the horns of a dilemma that he was with which he was dealing. And so the story begins about Joe the vampire. So where did this whole world, monster world, come up for you?
Well, there's 50 answers to that, from the Monsters movie 25 years ago, right, to creature feature old school monster movies that I love, which is why the characters in my book are classic monsters as opposed to things you've never heard of before.
Okay.
So it really was just a kid-like love of vampires that kept the idea burning. But where did actually Joe come from? True story. He's me. He's kind of me. I had to go through, like most of us, some learning moments, and arrived at some places where I needed to make some big decisions that weren't clear and weren't easy. And I had to humble myself in different ways to get through it successfully. That's a legit summary of a lot of instances in my life that have flat out made me better. They're difficult, but they're universal and they've made me better. So I was thinking about one in particular, John. I was thinking about quitting Ernst & Young, high-paying, prestigious job back in the day, and to get a PhD. And I didn't know if I was smart enough. I didn't know if I could take the question marks, because it was 4 years of who knows what, with who knows what kind of job on the back end, et cetera, et cetera. I was very unhappy in the professional services world because I was smart enough to hang out, but I didn't enjoy it a lot. I didn't fit. I knew there was a different place for me. That's all. They were amazing people, amazing brands for sure. So I'm thinking about that one day. My mother calls, and she's the person in my life then that could just make me break down and get really honest.
Sure.
And I started to cry. I haven't had spontaneous crying too many times, but this was one of those. And she's like, "Wait, what's going on with you? I just asked you how work was."
Yeah. And then you gave her a pretty good idea. That's right.
I gave her more than she asked for. And I told her how unhappy I was, and I didn't know what to do about it. And she said, "Well, what do you think you're supposed to do about it?" And I mentioned a PhD, and she said something so beautiful and simple. "Well, what's stopping you?" I was young, unmarried, no kids. "What's stopping you?" I just needed someone I cared about to cut through the fog and say that. And I had to then say out loud, but nothing is stopping me. And then it was just immediately clear. And I put in my time at Ernst & Young and got a PhD, and the rest is history. I had to laugh and cry at myself and get a little humble to say what needed to be said and become what I wanted to become. And that's exactly who Joe is too.
Yeah. Well, this is almost like we talk about this all the time in the Bosshole Chronicles, that a lot of us have been brought up with a very, I would say, an old model. I mean, a model that really makes us think, well, if I'm going to be successful, or in order to be successful, I have to follow this prescribed formula. And that's the crisis that Joe faces. He comes from, and I want everybody to read this story. I just don't want to give it away, but he comes from a long line. He comes from a long line of successful, people. There's a legacy there. We all carry a bit of a legacy, but we also carry baggage. And the first part of the story, we are experiencing and seeing his baggage, but then he makes this transformation. So Todd, help us understand a little bit, without giving away too much of the story, a little bit more about Joe and that moment of time, or that moment in time where he realized, I can't cling to this. And just as you said, I can't cling to this. There's nothing stopping me from trying something different.
Well, I think that he's sadly common in a lot of ways. He was thrust into a leadership position. Half of all new leaders, I'm just making this up to make a point, I don't know the exact number here, John, are kind of thrust into it, as opposed to we're really hoping for it. That's a good chunk of them. But then some of them are like, "Oh, I was asked to do this." Never been trained, never really thought about it, but I'm thrown in there. And so I just kind of go, gut instinct, no deep thought, go. And what I do kind of works over here, kind of doesn't work a lot over here. And I start getting feedback pretty quick that what I'm doing isn't working. That's a tough common as anything, experience for new leaders. And Joe's
Right.
no different. And so what he had to do at some point when the team he was tasked with leading was not killing it.
Right.
He had to
Right.
step back and go, okay, maybe it's not just them. And even if it is, even if they are challenges I need to address individually, maybe I'm a big part of it as well. What do I need to do differently? How can I restart my approach? What I offer them, how I help them become the best version they can be. And he has a vulnerable confessional moment with them, which is fun and surprising. And after everyone sees this person for the first time show up with a lot of authenticity, they actually get interested, start to listen, and maybe believe they can actually do something as a team for the first time. And it's just a spark lit by a guy getting real honest and humble for once.
And highly self-aware. I mean, when we talk about that, the humility and that realization that everything I've been trying right now is not authentic to who I am. And then when you talk about the team, so it's a really eclectic, very, collection of people that, little monsters that he gets, Wolfie and Z and Mum, and who's the other one?
Sheets the ghost.
Oh, yeah. It also reminded me of another childhood favorite of mine, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Island of Misfit Toys. Yeah. I mean, again, nobody wanted them. They were struggling. And, here, Joe, fix this, make this work. And by the way, you've got one day. I mean, again, when you read the story, you'll get this context. But he had that spark. But that's a reckoning. That is a really critical reckoning when it comes to, in our, what we would say, boss hole prevention, or that realization that I have got to get out of the boss hole zone. So help us draw that parallel, Todd, for your experience and how you're portraying this with Joe.
Well, I mean, from my experience, I remember thinking I've got to reach down and become something new if I'm going to be successful. I remember that many times. I'll give one example. I remember when I quit a high-paying job for life as a tenured professor 10 plus years ago. I'm a recovering academic. I'm not an academician anymore. That's right. I remember a feeling of clarity. I want to do this. I want to be a solopreneur more than I want to be a classic professor.
Right.
And I knew, just like Joe, I'm going to have to do something new, and it's going to hurt, and it might be humbling, and it needs to be done. And you say what needs to be said to your closest friends and your partner, and then you try new things. And I've been trying new things ever since. And he tried new things, which happen to look like some really good leadership best practices detailed in the discussion section of the book.
That's right.
But that's what he had to do. Number one, get humble. Number two, and this is the do something different part of it, he had to try and relate to them completely differently than he did in his first effort to see if he could elicit a more honest and purposeful and productive response. And he figured that out.
So when we think about his initial perception of his new team and the little monsters he was charged with to coach and help them grow, we often land on the disadvantages or the imperfections that people have. And he turned that around. And, I think that's very relatable, where you can't pray and hope for perfect direct reports. You've got to deal with what you're given. And that's absolutely what we did. But the word of that is inherent in that, to me, is risk. There's a risk, and he took it. So let's talk about those imperfections a little bit. Not only his, but also how he was able to leverage that with his new team.
Sure. Well, I mean, that just defines all of us, doesn't it? There's a reason that me and a few thousand others have been talking about authenticity and how we're all imperfect and need to learn from our mistakes. And that is completely natural and normal. For many, many years, we've been doing this. Right. But people still find it so troublesome that we just got to find new vehicles like this creative attempt in this book to get people to care about them. The truth is, people want to hide those imperfections. Bosses want to glare at them, as opposed to seeing what there is there to leverage. So individuals need to realize it's okay. Just like me, not being a future novelist of any note is okay, John. Right. I have to take the abundant number of things I'm actually really good at and continue saying I'm grateful for that. And how can I go help people with that? How can I find new ways to use those things? That's a productive perspective. It's not that I'm not capable of learning new things, but after so many tries, so what? If you look this way, sound this way, or this skilled, not this skilled, take the positive of it and go use it. What better choice could there possibly be? I mean, a big chunk of this is just these little misfit monsters trying to gain confidence and get past the view of imperfections as burdens to bear and see them as the potential assets they really are.
Yep. And those perspectives coming from the higher ups in Monster World. And I mean, that presses down. That is a heavy thing to have to bear. But when you have that one person that does believe and can draw that out of you, and that's what Joe did, that's when it becomes inspiring. And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person, and those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices, keep the boss holes from driving your talent away, design your teams for flawless execution, and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program. I always love a good catchphrase, a good catch line. I mean, something it's inherent in the book. And this is it. Take the step, get the scare, grow, and win. And essentially, he ended up, wasn't he, with the T-shirt SSGW?
That's correct.
And where did that come from? I mean, just it's a theme, and he stays with it. Tell me the relevance of that.
I definitely believe in and understand the need for a mantra, for a memory recall, of course, but you want to be helpful beyond that. So what can I do to summarize a way to be helpful and what Joe's trying to help them do? And I realized that even though there's many, many problems one might tackle when you're dealing with folks who are not where they want to be in terms of confidence and productivity,
right,
there's probably one favorite angle I've seen observing tons of people, and that is to get them to stop focusing on the mountain and just get really focused on the utter necessity, the importance of the first step. Get started. Stop thinking, worrying, and planning, or over-planning, I should say. Planning's good, but you can over-plan, and it's very common to get paralysis by analysis when we do that.
Yeah.
So you want people to go, I've done meaningful prep, and it is time to move. That's the first. Take the step. Get the scare is that first small win, that first acknowledgement that starting is the way it happens. That's where the first achievement comes from. And then it's about learning and growing from there, because it's just a long series of what I just said that actually gets you up the mountain. That's where that mantra kind of comes from.
I love it. When I think about the simplicity, whenever we're doing coaching or we're helping managers that have direct reports, that there's the performance issue. I mean, there's a significant performance issue. A lot of times I remind them, your job is to make their world more simplified right now, very targeted, help them see straightforward and put in the crosshairs what the objective is. And when you do that, it takes all that crap, all that noise that's around them that can be a distraction, and the manager becomes that catalyst to be able to simplify things. And that's what Joe did for the little monsters, who ultimately became the bigger monsters. And in the book, there's a moment where each of them is stepping into the cloud. Okay, they pick a cloud and they go into it for their scare. And what was terrifying at first for them then became a point of excitement and enthusiasm, because they had that very simple mantra, and then they were proving to themselves their ability to do it, which I think is essential for a manager, non-boss hole, to help the direct reports understand what they're capable of. But they're not doing it themselves. They're not doing it for them. That's correct. That's the huge difference. You're not there to do it for them. You're to evoke that out of them. Does that make sense?
It's everything. It's this wonderful encapsulation of a lot of these ideas. It's about perspective. It's amazing how one task can feel a particular way under certain circumstances, and the same task can feel very different under different circumstances. So when someone's lacking belief and or not vibing with good rapport with their manager, a task can look horrifying and difficult. And
Yeah.
the same task, when you find some meaningful self-confidence and a real, honest, authentic, productive, kind vibe you're starting to get with your supervisor, when that happens, the same task all of a sudden becomes a puzzle that might be fun to solve. And maybe even there's another one after that. Perspective, forgive the cliche, is everything for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That is so true. A bit off topic, but it was interesting to me only because I don't know why it jumped out at me, but Joe wears Ray-Bans. I love, in the day when I used to wear contacts, I used to wear Ray-Bans. I actually do have prescription Ray-Bans now, something about them. And Doc Martens, which was for Z, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I found some stability there.
Yeah. Where did those come from?
Just wonderfully selfish stuff, John. This is me. I'm wearing prescription Ray-Bans right here looking at you.
That's right.
I've got the sunglasses that are prescription as well. I just love them. I always have. They're classic indicators of cool in my world.
Right.
And Doc Martens were a alternative look at me, I'm cool thing from my teenage years that never went away. And to this day, every stage I step on to give a speech, I'm wearing jeans and Doc Martens. So I had to put them in this book.
Perfect. And what a nice call out for both of those brands. Good brands. Absolutely. Well, one of the things I love about the title and even how it introduced the story is Dancing with Monsters can have many different facets and many different interpretations. And a lot of us in our day-to-day work feel like we're dancing with monsters and running from monsters. It's inherent in what happens when you get into leadership and trying to figure the leadership thing out, the people thing out. Sure. But there are some very specific leadership rules that you call out in the book. So, I think for all our, managers that are stuck in the boss hole zone, I'd love for us to hit those and really emphasize those, because that's the biggest takeaway from the book, I believe.
Sure, absolutely. Roll.
So collaborate, don't dictate. Let's hear about that one.
It's classic. A couple of these are somewhat unique to me. A couple are classics that I just retool with words and approach. That's a classic. And well, I should say for me, it's a classic. We're seeing an evolution in business cultures. Some are still looking like dinosaurs. You know who you are, but you're probably not listening anyway. And others are becoming very progressive and everywhere in between. So for some people, this won't sound revolutionary, but on average, believe me, it's still very, very necessary advice. The idea is simple. Adults do not wish to be treated like children. Mm-hmm. and yet the tendency very clearly is to manage over a little more towards what we call micromanaging, instead of trying to clearly define expectations, provide resources, and then give people the room, the autonomy, the latitude to do the job. Thus, the manager ideally can manage outcomes, not process. Ideally, you intervene when there's problems and you need to help and provide resources and coach and correct and what have you. But the goal is not to stay looking for those over their shoulder. The goal is to really get their voice sincerely in the decision-making process, and then, try and make decisions. I know you can't do this with every decision. Some you got to make yourself.
Right.
Some you can really get their input, and then you, as the formal leader, have to own the decision. That's two big chunks. Another huge chunk you can let go of, even though it's under your plate. We're going to hire someone, and everyone loves these three people. And if the team loves one of them more than the rest, I'm going to listen to them sincerely, because that's who they're going to work with every day. And then the legion of smaller decisions that define our happiness every day. Hey, do we want to stay late tonight or work on Saturday? Hey, how do we want to celebrate that big victory we just have? Stop dictating what you think is the answer on these lesser things that are important to them, that dominate our days, and let them own it. Because when you collaborate, it's hilarious, regardless the nature of the actual decision, how much more committed to it they will be.
Oh, for sure. Okay, let's look at the next one. Candor, not just kindness. I love this one.
I actually love it too. And this is a me one. This is not a classic. So we're seeing a revolution in positivity, the push for congeniality and a positive work experience in a variety of ways. But it's actually gone so far in the first 15 years or so of us really pushing this, that there's a new term out there that scholars and practitioners call toxic positivity. The idea that we can be so positive and so resisting anything negative that we actually fail to have meaningful conversations. And what I like to remind people is that congeniality, kindness, positivity are beautiful, but they absolutely must be balanced with candor, which is straight talk, no innuendo. Say what needs to be said, say it nicely, but say what needs to be said. Turns out, John, when you have lots of candor in a difficult or ugly culture, candor hurts. People can't deal. But if you have a good base of congeniality, right, positivity, kindness, helpfulness, supportiveness, under that foundation, man, candor is digestible, fuel-filled feedback that we need more of. You can't have one without the other. You need both.
Yeah, for sure. And our listeners will recognize that because a few weeks ago we had Kim Peters on from Radical Candor, two-part series. And I think about, toxic positivity and something she also refers to as ruinous empathy. I mean, we think it's the same, but we think we're being helpful, but we are not. And so I love that. Okay. So opportunities, not obstacles. That's the third one.
You got it. We mentioned perspective a minute ago, and this is the way I just chose to phrase it. It's a long story. The short version is our mental choice about how to frame something first for ourselves and then to the team. Absolutely. It's scientific finding, 4 years. Absolutely changes, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, how much they react to it productively versus in a problematic fashion. Long term, on average, teams will perform better when you take most of the challenges they face and give them something positive to think about regarding the nature of the challenge, not just a negative frame.
Yep. Good. All right. Next one in line, authenticity, not acting. This is, wow. Yeah.
This is classic Dewett stuff for sure. I mean, we know that men and women want more authentic human connection at work every day, and we fail to get a meaningful quotient, if you will. Why? Because we're reasonably intelligent, and our intelligence has tricked us into being social, silly people sometimes. We show deference to others, and we act a certain way. We act in a way that meets the expectations of our colleagues, our supervisor, the leadership team, our customers, our vendors. We play a role, which is humorous because most of us weren't trained to be actors, of course.
Right.
So I just like to remind people that is a sign of social intelligence. You're supposed to indulge this much, not this much. The rest of what you're doing should move slowly and prudently towards being a little more real, raw, and authentic, because humans tend to respond to that a little more sincerely, which is priceless.
Oh, sure. And that forges such a strong bond in the world of psychological safety. When we think about the absence of the fear of retribution for bringing up, issues, problems, mistakes, or challenging status quo, the opposite of that is what we would call impression management. And I think that's, that's inauthenticity, and it doesn't help. It just does not help. But sometimes it just is pervasive in an organization, and it stalls everything out. Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned that in a lot of different forums, including in certain ways in the book. It's funny that you use that term because it's so popular for a reason today, psychological safety. So about 90 years ago when I was working on my dissertation, I was actually in touch with Dr. Amy Edmondson, who really kind of in the literature crystallized the importance of and definition of that term. And you can definitely read into it in Dancing with Monsters for sure. What are you establishing when Joe finally learns how to behave in a way that draws out from them the best version of themselves and encourages them to do some things they've never done before that I'm not even sure we're allowed to do some of the things that we're going to try. There's only one summary concept that's best to explain why someone would be okay with that, and that is psychological safety. You're on the money.
So here's the last one. Be the change, not the boss. Hit us with that one, Todd.
Well, it's a lot of leaders, especially new leaders, get into a position where they need to convey certain things and convince people of certain things that need to happen. And so they proclaim what others should do for us to all be successful. That is unavoidable and understandable, but it's just like being positive. So much is enough. And then the rest is that there's a better way. And the better way really than just always saying what we should do and how we should be is to go do those things yourself and go be those things yourself. This is my way of rewriting the classic phrase, leaders model the way. They don't have to say, I'm a nice guy and I'm open to feedback. They treat people well, thus they know that they're nice, and they listen quietly and say thoughtful things in response. Thus people know that they're open to feedback. They don't have to proclaim it.
That's true. That is true. Well, Todd, I tell you what, I'm so excited to have you back, and I'm excited for you because the book just published, and I'm quite sure, as has been kind of your history, you're going to be out there on the speaking circuit. This is going to be wonderful content to be able to share with audiences. But let me ask you this: what else is on the horizon for you coming up?
I've simplified, as they say, stay in your lane and leverage your core competencies and all that. So I've done 20 things for sure over the years. In recent years, I've gained great comfort and success doing three main things. I still do some other things, but three main things. And that's make courses where I continue to have, at this point, I've created over 50 books and online courses, 40, almost 45 courses alone now. So make courses, give speeches, write books. So since Monsters just came out, I'm going to take a nice, thoughtful year or two and really try and plant seeds like I'm doing chatting with you right now and get people to be aware of it. And I built a nice keynote around it. I can't wait to start delivering that. But really, my main focus is books, speeches, and an ever increasing number of online courses around different leadership competencies.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I can speak from personal experience. For those of you that are looking for a keynote or somebody to come in for a powerful message, Dr. Todd Dewett is your guy. You'll absolutely want to engage him. And please check out the show notes because links to all of Todd's books will be in there, obviously, especially Dancing with Monsters, as well as a link to his webpage. And you already probably know Dr. Dewett because from LinkedIn Learning, how many
over 40 at LinkedIn Learning now.
40 courses. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, listen, I have to tell you, this has been such a pleasure. Good to see you. I'm so excited for you. 2023 sounds like it's starting off to be pretty exciting, and I'm sure you'll be getting a lot of opportunities to talk more about Dancing with Monsters.
I hope so. I'm very excited. Thanks for having me, John. Good to see you.
All right, brother. Take care. We'll see you soon. We will catch you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles. We'd like to thank our guest today on the Bosshole Chronicles. And if you have a Bosshole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.